Hello everyone, thank you for joining us today. I'm Nicky Blackburn, I'm the editor of ISRAEL21c, and I'm coming to you live from Israel, where even now in the evening it's about 90 degrees Fahrenheit. For those of you who don't know us, ISRAEL21c shares stories that introduce the world to the amazing people and innovations coming from Israel. We're an online organization. We've always been online, which gives us a real advantage in these corona times. And we're about to celebrate our 20th anniversary. In the last few years, we set up a new digital ambassador program with university students across the US. Just 2 days ago, in fact, we had our annual retreat on Zoom this time, and our 54 new ambassadors will be working on a year-long campaign called Groundbreaking Israel. So watch for their work, it's going to be very exciting. We began this new webinar series a few months ago as a way to introduce our audience to Israeli thought leaders during these difficult times. And today's topic is our cities. We can all see that they're in trouble, and it's the same all over the world. Corona has dealt a very severe blow to them. Stores are closing, offices are emptying, cultural and entertainment events are non-existent, and people are leaving in droves. So can our cities survive? What's going to happen to them? To answer these questions, we have three amazing guests, so let me introduce them. First of all, we have Zippy Brand-Frank. Hello, Zippy. Zippy is the Deputy Mayor of Tel Aviv, Yafo. Before joining the municipality, she was a broadcast journalist, and today also produces and directs award-winning documentaries. We also have Professor Nurit Alfazi. Nurit is an Associate Professor at the Department of Geography and Environmental Development at Ben-Gurion University. She's the Deputy Chair of the Israeli Association of Planners and a Deputy President at the Israeli Association of Geographers. And we also have Alan. Hello, Alan. Alan Aronoff. He's a partner in AI architecture and urban design. He's been involved in projects including a master plan for 6,000 housing units in the north of Israel, the reclamation of the Eilat airport, Jerusalem's Teddy Park, and Tel Aviv's Keren HaKiryat Tower complex, amongst others. So thank you all for joining me today. It's really nice to see you. Just one quick reminder before we start. We have about 15 minutes at the end for questions. So please, if you have any questions, send them through the Q&A tab and we will do our best to get to them. So to start this discussion, I thought it would be really helpful for us to take a quick look back at how the city developed historically and why they're important. Now, Nurit, this is your field. So tell us a little bit about this.
Well, cities exist about a little bit more than 10,000 years. They existed wherever culture started. They existed in the Far East, they existed in the Middle East, of course, and in Europe, in South America, in North Africa. Whenever people wanted to interact and to institutionalize their interaction, cities were created. Cities, this is what actually they do. I mean, everything that we have from agriculture to, I don't know, space programs is the result of human interaction. And the institutionalization of human interaction is giving groups of people a huge advantage. And this was the case throughout history everywhere around the world, in every culture. Whenever we look around, whenever culture was created. I mean, cities were not created as a stable phenomena to start with. Cities were developed and then destroyed and abandoned and redeveloped and developed in other places too. And this was in a way a trial and error of humanity. But once cities became a more stable phenomena, we can see that culture and technology simply developed so quickly. And this is something that today we cannot think about culture without cities.
When we were talking the other day, you said something interesting. You said that even if you don't live in the city, you're actually living an urban life today. Can you tell us what you mean by that?
Yes, I mean that when, like, even, I don't know, before the first revolution is the agricultural revolution. The agricultural revolution meant that people wanted to stay in a certain place, and in order to stay in that place, they had to develop the technology that was available to them, and that was agriculture. Today, we are in a state that whenever we live, we are interacting with the technology of human beings. This means that even if we live in a kibbutz or in a small village somewhere, we consume, we go to study, we go for pleasure and leisure, we know people from other places. We are in a system. Once we are in the system, the fact that we live in such a semi-detached place is meaningless. I mean, it is only one part of our lives. We live, we put our head at the bed there, but the other parts of our life are essentially urban. This is something that is very important for us to know, because sometimes, you know, there are statistics about half of the humanity living in cities and so on. But in fact, it is much more. I mean, even if we live out of city, we live urban life. This is why we call it suburban. Suburban life is, in a way, urban life.
Right. I mean, we can see now, though, that you know, the real heart of cities is suffering. And Tzipi, you're you know, you're in a perfect place to be able to explain what this actually means. I mean, so what are the problems that Tel Aviv has been experiencing since Corona broke out? Oh, Tzipi, you're on mute.
Sorry about it. Since the outbreak of the pandemic, actually, we face different issues. Tel Aviv has, you know, rich leisure culture that includes sports event, art, nightlife, concerts, restaurant, tourism. But, you know, leisure culture is also based on density and crowding. And once the physical distancing was implanted, the entire leisure culture of the city and tourism was harmed. You know, in the metropolis, for example, people usually live in small apartments and spend most of the day in the urban space outside. Now forced to stay at home with expensive rent fees, living in a big city suddenly lost its charm and many of its benefits besides, and there's the unemployment. So we can address the problems on several aspects. First of all, from the perspective of businesses, unemployment and recession, you know, our economic model of our city consists of 350,000 cars entering the city every day from the suburbs. People are coming for work, they come to eat lunch, to do business, and they go out to sleep outside. So our major income from business and from tourism was stopped in a way. And also, it's important to understand another thing. The municipality budget majorly relies on taxes from the offices and from the businesses, about 89% of it. And meanwhile, Tel Aviv young population, many of whom work in restaurants and bars, have been impacted severely. Thousands of the Tel Aviv inhabitants were left unemployed. Many artists and people who work in the culture business. So first of all, we did very immediate moves as a municipality, and we waived, for example, 3 months of the municipality taxes immediately. And then we formulated a program for the reopening of restaurants and bars, allowing restaurants and bars to temporarily expand their seating onto the sidewalk. And about, you know, we spread out about thousands of chairs and sunshades in public spaces to provide the additional outdoor seating. We launched a public campaign to encourage buying from local businesses. We wanted to help the local businesses in the city not to be shut off. both.
I mean, can you
Yes.
just sorry to interrupt, but I mean, and we can get onto what cities should do to sort of save themselves. But what did it mean in real terms? Are you seeing people leaving the city? You're seeing the young people leaving to go to the suburbs? Because I know that this is something that's happening in New York, it's happening in London, it's happening in city after city around the world.
We don't have yet the numbers, but we can predict that there will be, that some of the people will leave, especially young people, you know, who work for the restaurants and for the coffee shops, and, you know, students that will be unable to pay their rent. We don't have yet the numbers. We can estimate that there will be several. We are doing all kinds of actions in order to help them as a municipality to the extent that what we can do. Meanwhile, there is also, we're not sure about the future of young families as well. But we're trying, you know, it's yet early. We can see the people talk about it, but we don't have yet the numbers, because also on the other end, there are many new families that come to live in Tel Aviv from abroad, coming back. So we don't calculate yet the numbers.
What about, I mean, we know, for instance, that offices are, more and more people are not going back to their offices, even though that they are now allowed to go back. So people aren't going back to the offices to work. Offices are closing, and shops are closing as well. I mean, so are you seeing that in Tel Aviv? Is this something you're experiencing there?
Yes, of course. We do experience that people don't get back to the offices. We do experience, we don't have yet the numbers in terms of taxes, but we work on a lower budget than what we used to work before. We can see that, you know, also from my personal experience, I see, for example, my husband works for the HighTech, for an HighTech company, and they don't go back. They don't go back. And if people go back, I know most of my friends are also from the HighTech scene, and if they come back to their offices, it's usually to smaller spaces, only to meet like 2 times a week or 3 times a week, and so they do rent smaller places. And I estimate there'll be an impact, a huge impact in it. Our estimation in the municipality estimation is about 25%. The 25% of the offices will not come back, but I think it's going to be wider phenomenon. But that's the current estimation that we have.
Nurit, yes.
Yes, I must say that these changes are fundamental, of course, and they are very visible, but it's not the first time that we've seen changes like this taking place. I mean, just after World War II, industry all around the world shifted, especially shifted from east, from the north west to the east and to the south, and many cities were abandoned by the industry. Tel Aviv too, by the way, but of course cities in the US and cities in Europe, they have abandoned huge amount of production space that was left empty, and a lot of workers that needed to reinvent themselves in a way, and cities changed. So maybe we are facing another change. It doesn't mean that things will dissolve or dismantle. It means that we are facing a phase of transition, which is maybe even,
I mean, it's interesting that you talk about this, because what I wonder is, I mean, first of all, well, let's go back a second. So, I mean, you're talking about after the Second World War, that there were problems then. And we've also had pandemics in the past hit our cities. You know, we've had, going back through the centuries, we had the Black Death, bubonic plague, we have malaria, we have this, typhus, typhoid. I mean, how did that impact cities?
Cities faced a lot of disasters, fire and war and climate change, and a lot of disasters. But cities came up I mean, kebab, and somehow like in the wood, when you have a fire and you get the wood to reunion everything, so you get this enhanced environment. And I think that what we're watching here is really a very small crisis compared to the past crises that cities faced. Cities were abandoned, cities were just a few, we know about the Spanish pandemic, but even before, many diseases and wars changed the urban structure.
Alan, you have something.
I was just going to point out that there was a direct response to various plagues in the past. In Paris, for instance, the great boulevards were designed as a response to, they understood at the time that keeping people very closely together was not a good thing. And they experienced horrific pandemics. And I don't know if you would call it a pandemic because it was more limited. They didn't have the worldwide travel that we have today that conducts it around the world. But certainly within cities, I was always surprised first seeing those big boulevards and wondering how it was that they developed these big spaces when they were using horse and buggy, and only later did I understand that it was a response to this. Thing is, we've had many years since this happened, and so the powers that be tend not to relate to it too seriously, and now of course they do, but until recently it was something that theoretically could happen, but we learned from history we wouldn't be where we are right now, really.
Yes. I mean, do you think this whole crisis with Corona and with the cities is going to be a short-term thing, or you think it will take some years to resolve? What do you all think about this?
I would.
Sippy, you're on mute. Sorry.
Oh. I think some of the problems are likely to last longer and require long-term planning, such as unemployment and continued support for businesses. We need to be attentive to the changing environment, and especially at the offices sectors and the tourism sector. Those short-term problems might become long-term problems. Problem situation include also the word opportunities. We should look at it. We should look at this as if it's an opportunity for us to advance critical infrastructure work, turning roads into new pedestrian zones, for example, changing the priorities that we have, investing more in education and in culture, change the urban planning and urban spaces to fit the changing reality. We have a lot of creative solutions. We work on it. And many new ideas can overcome and and challenge the virus that are confronting us with it. I think the virus, what happened with the COVID is it made a lot of important issues, mostly at government level, that were neglected. They become urgent to deal with. It includes education for early ages, for example, from birth till 3 years old, which is untreated in Israel, and also healthcare. So as I said, I want to alter the term that you used, problems, to challenges and to opportunities, and to reprioritize and to adjust our way of living and our residents' well-being for the long term. I believe that eventually we will work better as a city.
I would just also, about the short-term, long-term thing, even if today we had a vaccination, or we had some way of instantly, I heard there are dogs that are doing it really effectively now. They can sniff out COVID-19 very rapidly among many people. Like, even if we had this effective thing, I think we're learning that we can't be brought to our knees again on a global basis by something like this, by a tiny microbe that suddenly spreads all over the place and the whole world stops. So even if we get past this very quickly, we've learned our lesson, I think, and there will be, I think, as Sippy was pointing out, and there will be many things that will impact the way we design and we approach the outline plannings across a country and certainly within cities.
Right.
Yes, and I think that apart from challenging the municipality, which is of course an important thing, I mean, we're talking about what happens in the city. I believe that people's creativity will provide us solutions to those challenges and problems, even by, I don't know, short-term activities and long-term changes in the public space, which is actually the essence of the city.
Right. So none of you really think that this crisis that that our cities are facing now, the corona crisis, is different from other crises. You don't see it as a larger one or something that could have a more serious impact. You see it as something that is cities have to overcome. Is this right?
I do believe that this is the case. I mean, cities faced challenges, recent challenges, just because before Corona, even retail going online and things like that, that changed, you know, the urban space. They had a special impact. Nevertheless, cities were up to these changes, and there were much more. I think that we are, in a way, every crisis is unique. Nevertheless, if you look at the magnitude of this crisis, I don't think that it is devastating.
Sorry, you don't think it's, I missed the last
I don't think
sentence.
that it is, yeah. I don't think that it is devastating, that it is.
Right.
I agree with Nuri.
Yeah, it's very disruptive, but it's also transformative. It's something that will evolve. And there's always been tensions between urban life and suburban life, and even beyond that, exurban. You know, you go past the suburbs. It's been around a long time. If you go back over 100 years to, you know, people like Georg Simmel or I don't know, Ebenezer Howard, or the many James Jacobs, who would relate to the suburbs as being parasites on the city. You know, the city is the place to be, and there were people championing the suburbs at the time. It's something that exists, and it will exist. It just will evolve. And there's people that absolutely love cities, and we're humans that are social animals, and we will make it work.
Right.
I also agree. If you just look at the, sorry.
Carry on, Nuri.
So if you just look at, just talking about suburbs, the way that commuting time reduced in the United States, I mean, it's a little bit painful issue here in Israel, but if you look at the United States, then the average commuting time today is about 20 minutes, which was huge at the 80s and the 90s. And this is a way of space, not through plans, but through private action. A lot of dispersed private actions that actually make space much more efficient.
Right. Yeah, that does hurt when you hear that the average time is 20 minutes and it's about an hour and a half from where I live to get into Tel Aviv. And I live, what, 30 kilometers away? I mean, it's awful. In fact, Alan, you moved out of the city, didn't you? You were working in Jaffa and you moved out about 10 years ago or something. Is that right? What prompted you to?
Less than that, but yes, just a few years ago. Yeah, at that point, Tel Aviv was, like you say, just jam-packed with cars and traffic. We had meetings in our office in Yafo just to get to the main government building in the middle of the city. Would take sometimes longer than, you know, say from the Modi'in area to get into the city. So yeah. It got to that point, and, you know, people coming in, consultants or clients, you know, parking would be a nightmare, and the noise and it was just, it got to be to the point where we said we could be on a nice green moshav and get all our work done. And at first people raise their eyebrows, and then they show up and there's plenty of place to park and it's quiet, and, you know, so there is a draw to that, to the suburbs. But you know, I think it's not like it's this or that. It's where you're at in your life, maybe with children. And many years I lived, you know, in Tel Aviv, I don't know, 13 years or so, and I loved it. We were near the beach, and you know, there was a lot to be said for it, and I don't regret it. But things change, and I still love the city. It's still great, and I lived in Manhattan for years. You know.
Okay, Alan, when we talked before, you mentioned, and also this is something that Nurit, you've brought up too, that basically our cities were in a state of transition before Corona hit anyway. Can you, Alan, you want to tell us a little bit about this transition that you were discussing?
Well, yeah, there was, again, like I said, this kind of tension, urban, suburban, and there has been a trend going on. Maybe you've heard of it, this idea of hipsterbia, you know, where the suburbs could also be hip as opposed to being just bedroom suburbs where you know, you work in the city and you come back and you just go to sleep. But we found that the younger people, late teens, early 20s, are being priced out of the city. And so they were still living in their parents' homes, and this is happening till today. And so they created pubs and nightlife and cultural things for themselves out in the burbs. So this was happening pre-pandemic. There were forces like that when the cities were becoming so pricey. But there have also been trends within the city to lighten things up, surprisingly, turning major thoroughfares into pedestrian avenues and trying to, you know, the bike paths. You know, before this was done, you know, we'd be doing things like this and suggesting things like this. Even you mentioned that Kiryat project was working hard to get green spaces and pedestrian spaces and encountering enormous opposition. And they say, well, it's not in the outline plans. It doesn't exist. We can't do it, and it'll never work. And here you see it happening. You see guerrilla design, they call it, you know, making, what do they call it? Parklets, where you take a couple of parking places and you put in more restaurant seating at the expense of parking. So it would have been unthinkable before now, but the Corona business is kind of ushering that in and will help cities. And I won't even get into the idea of autonomous cars and how that will free things up considerably later on. But if you want, we can go into that later.
Yeah, well, tell us a little bit about that, because you mentioned this before. In fact, Nurit also, I talked to Nurit about autonomous cars too, so perhaps you can tell us how you think that's going to impact cities, and then we'll ask Nurit as well.
Okay, well, just, look, I mean, as an architect, in many ways, we're framed within what we do. We you know, work with, say, parking and traffic consultants, and all of their standards are based on what exists now. And very often I'll ask a question, well, things are changing and evolving. They say, no, this is it. You got to have 1.3 parking places per unit, and all of these numbers, and you just kind of look at it. But there are things changing, and one thing is, like I mentioned, the autonomous car. It is evolving, like it or not. It will be here, and you'll be able to, you know, take your smartphone and order a car, and it will come, a robotic driver, and you will get in, and you don't need to own your own car. That will take you to the city. You get out, you do not park, and we've just freed up huge amounts of areas in the city, vast spaces used for parking structures and roadways, and it just goes on, and that will be very transformative, and it will give us more social distancing ultimately, aside from quality of life and not everyone having to put out huge amounts of money on a couple of tons of steel that just sits there for 23 out of 24 hours. So these things have been evolving, and they almost fit like a glove in many ways to our new sensibilities during this pandemic and post-pandemic, I think.
Mm.
So I'm very glad that we finally reached a small point of disagreement, because I agree with you that transportation will change, and it is changing. I just don't think that the autonomous car is I don't know, the thing that we're, the vision. Because when we have an autonomous car, we must have much more transportation on the road. So we will need larger roads. And when we have autonomous cars, they will also have to park somewhere. I mean, if you want to raise your telephone and invite a car, it means that the car needs to be nearby. And if it is nearby, then probably it has to park somewhere in the city, not far away. I do believe that public transportation is the answer. I think that we will go past the trains to something that is much more convenient, surface, quicker, adaptable. But I don't think that autonomous cars are the solution because of the problems that you see, obviously, with each one getting into a can and going around in the city.
Yeah, well, I mean, it is a bit of a stretch. It's kind of a futuristic thing for us still. It's like looking at who would have thought a smartphone can have both a camera and a recorder and it's a cell phone, all the, you know, just absurd. But I think when you work it through, if hypothetically the technology would work, and it's still a bit hypothetical, obviously, I think it would reduce it. I mean, a car drops you off and it doesn't park, it picks up the next person and it drops them off and then the next person, and it's this thing that's built differently to last and be at rest much less than the cars of today. And then you have the technology where one car can drive very closely to the next, unlike human drivers, and they can shoot through intersections. All of these things, if they were to really work, it would free up, I think, a lot of traffic and parking. But we're arguing about something in the future when, you know, it may or may not exist.
Yeah. But today I stand and walk and I wait for the bus. But if in your vision there is no need to wait for the bus, so a lot of people that are going today, you don't see them driving at all because they go on trains and buses. They would move to switch to this autonomous car, and this will be disaster.
Well, an autonomous car doesn't necessarily have to be one person. It can also be many, you know, larger vehicles too. Okay,
I think we're going to have to agree to disagree on the autonomous car.
Well, I tend to agree. You know, I tend to agree with Nurit.
So, you started earlier, and I stopped you because I wanted to go in other directions at the time. But can you tell us exactly? I mean, what after the in reaction to the Corona crisis, what is Tel Aviv municipality planning? What are they going to do? How are they going to keep people in the city? How are they going to, you know, keep the city alive?
So as I mentioned before, we had, you know, there's a huge, there's a big public campaign to encourage buying from local businesses. It's very important for us because there are several, you know, some hundreds of local businesses that were closed lately. So we are trying to keep them up. There's a big program right now running for families. You know, August has never been a month in which we had all the residents are staying in the city itself. And there are no schools and no kindergartens. And we're running a municipality. The municipality runs a program they are initiated actually called August Mishpachti for families. We tend to provide hundreds of activities a day all over the city from north to south to Jaffa. And meanwhile, also we try to involve the businesses, the private businesses as well. And we tend to provide activities for the families in order that they, you know, to keep the residents here and to give them some solutions. Also, there's we work on the elderly people. We're trying to communicate and to keep the communication with them. There have been about 36,000 of elderly residents that are all over the city, and social services workers are keeping in touch with them. It's very important for us. For example, there's the Golden Park program, which is providing each morning safe environment between 8 and 10 a.m. for older people. I think it's a great initiative. In the education, for example, we just worked on it today. You know, we're trying to provide it. That's a big issue actually, because we were surprised to find ourselves not ready. Not only Tel Aviv was not ready, all Israel was not ready for the remote learning. Not in terms of not in terms of computers, and not also with the infrastructure. So there's a huge work that is done here with the Minal Chinuch, with the education department, that are providing in order to provide better support for the schools and for the kindergartens for the remote learning. And even now, I can tell you it's still a huge challenge, especially for little kids. How do you create school environment at home, if it's at all possible, without having the parents around, because they need to go to work? So it's kind of impossible.
Actually, and you're touching. Sorry, you're touching on an important subject actually, because we are going to have to rethink our homes. We're going to have to rethink our offices. Exactly. So I'm wondering how you all think that this is going to play out. I mean, these are huge changes that are going to have to take place.
Right. Yes. As you've said, even schools, for example, in Israel and also in our city, classes are more dense than elsewhere. And we need to find new places. I mean, we need to find new, maybe to think of learning in parks, which we didn't have before, and to get the right permissions and to find the right places for this. This is a whole huge work that is being done right now in order to provide larger spaces, in order to have the social distancing. In homes, for example, I believe that there should be, because as I mentioned before, apartments. Most people live in small apartments, especially in the center of the city, and they need, some of them would not go back to work or will work from home, and there is not enough space. So maybe in the building itself, we can create the lobby or some at the garden of the building, of 30 apartment building, like a WeWork for the neighbors, or something that will they'll be able to to share or something, but at least there'll be some solutions. Also, in terms of also in the conversation you had about cars and transportation, what we see is that we're trying to give priority to the pedestrians as a municipal policy, a very strict municipal policy that is running right now, that our priority goes to the pedestrians and to those who walk the streets, and especially now in the terms of social distancing, it needs to be much more emphasized. We need to create pedestrians. Lately we have established or started like a new 10 pedestrians around the city. It's gonna be even a wider program, I would say. And also in terms of closing or giving a priority to public transportation and giving priority to biking in the city itself. At the end, it will close smaller roads.
Yeah. I mean, Alan, this is something you touched on earlier when you said that, you saw the boulevards in Paris and couldn't understand why they were so broad. And of course, so many cities are going to have to perhaps change their roads into pedestrian roads rather than cars, so that roads with cars, just to give people more space. Mm-hmm. Alan, when we talked earlier, you were talking about offices as well, and about how when you started out, it was cubicles, and then they moved to open plan. What do you think now is going to happen?
Well, I think it is going to change. I think I mentioned where I had worked in New York in this large architecture firm there, and when I worked there, we each had, several square meters of, it was sort of an open office, but we had kind of partitions in between, and we had space. And now when I'm still sort of, go and I visit my old firm there, and last time was pre-pandemic, and they were everyone sitting shoulder to shoulder in front of their, workstations. And I think that that is going to have to change very rapidly. And to the extent that we're still working with the model of high-rise office buildings and commercial space, it will have to evolve. But with the new distancing, maybe with more people working in the suburbs and video conferencing like this, that space will free up. What that does to the economics of developers and people building 90-story skyscrapers today, it's very hard to say.
Actually, this is something that, you can't help but think about all the time, because, if, for instance, when you're in Tel Aviv, the place is peppered with cranes building offices, a lot of offices, and it's not just Tel Aviv, it's all over the world. What on earth is going to happen to these huge office complexes that are going up now? Will they become
Part of them will have to change. Part of them will have to change. I mean, I think offices will appear, and I think that a lot of businesses function need to remain in the form that they are. For example, at the central business district of each city, you will find this square mile that is permanently there. It doesn't move, it doesn't change. If you look at New York, if you look at London, if you look at Tel Aviv, it is always in the oldest part of the city, and it is a place for making businesses, and it could change a little bit. It is the place where people need to interact face to face. And this is something that will not change. But those offices that could work in use the remote work and the remote internet and things like that, these offices will probably change, and maybe part of the offices will be, I don't know, maybe transferred to maybe to housing, maybe to commerce, to I don't know, hotels. You could only imagine what.
I'm sure about hotels, but sorry. I said I'm not sure about hotels, but I'm sure that there must be some transformation into housing.
It can absolutely be done. Like on our Kiryat project, we have two very tall office towers, and next to it two residential towers, and above that and below that is a whole retail complex and a shopping mall. And the idea of mixed use is something that's been developing, quite a bit lately. And it just means that the proportion between the different functions will change. We can easily, not so easily, but it can be done to go from commercial space to residential space, even within a tower. And that will happen. Exactly how, it's ironically, there are new buildings like being built today who are already being retrofitted. It's kind of wild, but that's what is happening. Yeah.
So
just reminding you again, the industry that left the cities all over the world, industrial factories were abandoned. They were changed in time, but they were transferred into something else.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to ask one more question, and then because I want to try and leave time for the audience as well. But I've been quite impressed by all of you. Seem so positive. You're saying this is temporary, that this is an opportunity. So, do you think that our cities could actually become better as in response to Corona? Do you think we're looking at positive changes here?
I would say I would say yes in many ways. It's obviously horrific for people who are suffering tremendously from this right now, but in the long run, spacing people farther apart would be a nice thing. And I remember as a student being appalled by the idea of a skyscraper and everybody kind of, pushed into little sardine cans, and it just seemed like a terrible thing. And then I started realizing, well, wait a second, if we put people like that, then we can maybe keep more green space around it, and maybe it's okay, but it's still, that density is an issue. And if now things will be spread apart a bit more, we may very well benefit, and cities can become really nice and not have that congestion that I described around my old office in Yafo.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Nurit had something to.
No, I mean, generally speaking, I am optimistic. I believe that cities could become better. I think that both inner apartments and public space could get better, because we are in a long process of consuming proximity and consuming space, spatial activities. And I think that we will see cities and the living spaces. I mean, living spaces are truly very important for people. People don't look at them just as a small apartment. They look at, because we pay a huge amount of rent for small apartments, not because of the apartments, but because of the public space that is nearby. Because we want to be in short distances from leisure, from retail, from culture, from education, from our friends, from our families. This is something that is really important to us. So I believe that cities that would be able to provide these models will be successful, and others will have to copy this and
Okay.
able to, yeah.
And Tzipi, any thoughts from your end?
Mm-hmm. No, as I mentioned, as I said before, this can be a great opportunities in terms of thinking or rethinking of important things that we have never dealt with them before, and it's like a restart of an engine. We're just rethinking of the models in which we lived, even from the municipality perspective and also from the personal perspective, and what's important for us, whether it's living, the way we live, the emphasis on family, the emphasis on the house itself, on housing, on the building itself. Many residents were just dealing with the building, how it looks like, and we should take care more of it, which is in a dense city is not something that you see quite often. And also in terms of looking at the public sphere, which is much more important, it has much more emphasis of the city and of the residents itself, of the people themselves. And also from, it's a restart for us in terms of education, of looking at our schools and what is education, and what's the parents' role in this system, what's the teachers' role, and how are we prepared for the 21st century?
Okay.
And what is our infrastructures? I mean, there are many levels, and I think it's an opportunity to rethink. Otherwise, we wouldn't stop to rethink. And now we have, we can stop and rethink, and that's what's important about it.
Okay. All right. So look, I'm going to take this over and ask some of the audience questions. So we have a question here. What are some of the changes you foresee in order to face future pandemics?
I would say there's another level that we haven't discussed, and that's more urban design on the national level. And it could be that we start focusing, instead of on very large urban centers, we distribute smaller urban centers that are more self-sustaining, growing, city gardens, all that sort of, but in smaller urban units. They could even it could possibly be even isolated if there is an epidemic as opposed to a pandemic. In that sense, I don't mean to say that would replace some of the very large cities, and it's not necessarily talking about Israel in this particular instance, but there could be a place for having smaller urban units that are not suburban. But we have examples of that. But I'm just saying that it on the national or on the level of an individual country or larger area, there is some rethinking that will also have to be done, aside from interior spaces and how restaurants can work and so on.
Nurit, you wanted to say something as well? You were shaking your head earlier.
Yeah, because I really don't think that small urban centers are the direction, because what we're seeing in the last 100 years, century, in the last century and more, is that cities are in a way growing larger. We're looking at mega cities, and in order to be competitive in current life, we need these mega cities to function. If we look at smaller scale cities, they lag behind because of the power of human interaction, because we now know that in larger urban centers, the wages are larger, the amount of education is larger, and a lot of other indices show that people do better off in larger urban centers. On the other hand, we need to see how to face future pandemics, maybe in the form of having small healthcare units spread around in the city, so that people will be able to get to small units and get aid, and somehow, I don't know, be able to fight, and maybe even divide people inside their houses and outside their houses at the level of the buildings. I don't know, we will have to think about this, but I don't think that small centers are in any way helpful for this,
Right.
or that they will be able to sustain.
Yeah,
Okay.
until now, I think that's true, but I'm just saying, going forward, this is just an option to think about, as opposed to suburbia, this extreme. Maybe this suburbia becomes a little bit more urbia to it, and maybe I'm just saying it's another level that has to be considered, that will also have an impact on.
Okay. Okay, I have another question here. How critical, and you know, we touched upon it briefly, but not much. How critical is mass transit to the continued growth of cities? And will people trust mass transit in the time of a pandemic?
It's a problematic issue. I mean, mass transit is essential for the functioning of cities. It is essential that people would be able to move around and to actually fulfill the opportunity that the city is providing. Otherwise, there is no point for the great amount of activities if you are not able to reach them. On the other hand, yes, it is problematic. I don't know how do we combine the both? I mean, maybe it's an industrial challenge. Maybe we need some startup to, I don't know, wrap us up into the mass transit, but there is a clash between these two.
Actually, somebody else wrote in and said, do we need our cities to keep the high-tech entrepreneurial spirit of Israel in particular, but of others, alive? Do we need our cities for that?
Well, I can tell you, my own son works in high-tech, and he hasn't seen the inside of his office at Intel for many, many months, and it's working very effectively there. And I don't know if they have plans quickly to bring them back. I know the same thing's been happening at Google and elsewhere. They build these wonderful internal cities, meditation spaces, exercise corners, and casual meeting places, and all of that is changing drastically with people working remotely.
Okay, another question here. Has the pandemic decreased the amount of new construction? And will the projected amount of new construction decrease in the near future?
Well, it's
up till now
we can tell.
But up till now it didn't decrease, but probably in the future we estimate it might decrease a little bit. But up till now we didn't see any.
Right.
We're still working hard. We've got lots of projects that we haven't seen things suddenly come to a stop, and of course, we have long-term projects generally, but
Right.
still active.
Okay. All right. So look, sadly, we're going to have to finish. This has been a really fascinating discussion, and there were so many questions we couldn't get to, but you know, unfortunately we don't have time. And you know, it's very interesting. There have been lots of different opinions here and about what's going to happen next and how our city is going to develop. But one thing I think we should all take heart from is that you all think it's, you know, cities are here to stay, and that maybe Corona, yeah, and maybe Corona could actually make our cities better in the long run. So that's, you know, tremendously positive. So Nurit, Alan and Sifi, I really want to thank you very, very much for coming tonight and talking to us and sharing your wisdom. Thank you also to all our viewers and supporters. In fact, if you're interested in cities and urban planning, we have an article coming out in the next week or two, which will be about how Corona is altering the design of homes and workplaces. So look out for that. Anyway, so thank you all, and we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Very important putting minds together like this. It's great.
Thank
It
you.
is.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.